500 years ago in a village called Hangzhou, a young snake catcher called Xuan saves a white snake in a young woman's form. Another 500 years passed. The woman named Blanca then vows to find his reincarnation, no matter where he is. Verta, Blanca's sister who doesn't suppose the idea of finding the man, tells her not to throw away all they have worked for at the expense of finding a man that might not last forever with her. Blanca acknowledges the fact that humans are like dew, which only lasts for a moment, and that is why she just wants to see him momentarily and thank him for his kindness. She promises that her obsession will come to an end if she gets to meet her savior. Verta lightens up the mood a little by splashing water on Blanca, as they giggled. At the Lantern Festival, Blanca mistakenly drops her hairpin. Luckily it is being picked by a young man named Xu Shen. He returns it to an already enchanted Blanca on the broken bridge. Just as they try to get to know themselves, a woman named Mrs. Wang calls for the attention of Xu Shen, who is also known as Dr. Xu. She complains that her son has been vomiting. After necessary checks, Dr. Xu identified the problem to be indigestion. Luckily, he comes to Blanca and her sister again. Although Blanca refers to it as coincidence, Verta teases them, saying there are so many lanes they could have used to avoid each other. During their course of discussion, Blanca learns that Dr. Xu lives with his brother-in-law, after losing his sister 2 years ago. Just as they proceed, another emergency emerges and the attention of Dr. Xu is needed again. He is being dragged out of the discussion. They get to wait for him again, but the same thing happens, over and over again. Each time he tries to talk to Blanca, he gets taken away by the villagers in regard to a medical emergency. A frustrated Blanca and Verta are furious that Dr. Xu doesn't have a little spare time for himself. At night, just as Dr. Xu gets a little spare time for himself, he recollects his little encounter with Blanca as he plays the flute. Just then, Blanca and her sister Verta meet up with him again on boat. She claims it to be a coincidence again. Dr. Xu tries to be taken away by Uncle Boatman again, saying his wife is ill and he needs him. But this time, Blanca has had enough as she uses her magic to knock him off the boat and seal his mouth. Now that they are free from interruptions, Blanca asks that Dr. Xu show her around West Lake since it's her first time visiting Hangzhou. Dr. Xu drops the cure for Uncle Boatman's wife as he proceeds to go with Blanca and Verta. In their boat, he begins playing his flute. The tune sounds familiar, as Blanca joins in with a song. The next day, Xu walks down the village with his brother-in-law, Sheriff Li. Sheriff Li complains that there are lots of scammers in the village. He suspects Blanca and Verta to be scheming something because their sudden appearance seems strange. Xu vouches for them, saying they aren't up to something. Sheriff Li agrees that they aren't after Xu because there was nothing to rob him of. His sister's illness had left him in so much debt that he treated people for free and made no money. The only reasonable connection Xu had was Sheriff Li. Although Li has come to an agreement that the girls aren't after Xu's wealth, he is still disappointed that Xu had to arrange a marriage without informing him. Xu comforts him saying, when he meets Blanca he will surely like her. When Sheriff Li finally agrees to go, Xu tells him that they are at the House of Abundant Joy. Sheriff Li is terrified because they owe their boss Zhao 300 taels of silver. Together they decide to sneak inside the place, without alarming the boss, but unfortunately, their cover is blown. Sheriff Li meets Verta and immediately panics. He acts like he has met her somewhere before. Verta takes the two to go meet her sister Blanca. During their meal, Sheriff Li wants to be sure Blanca knows much about Dr. Xu's situation, but she clears him up saying that whatever difficulties he face, if they marry, she will face it with him, as it would be for better for worse. Just as they proceed to discuss more, Boss Zhao enters the scene. He hurriedly embraces Sheriff Li and Dr. Xu thinking they had come to repay their 300 taels of silver debt. When Boss Zhao finds out that they haven't come to pay up, he insults Dr. Xu, which makes Verta really furious. Blanca calms her down as she pays up Dr. Xu's debt with her hair ornaments. Xu Xuan thanks her gratefully as Boss Zhao is extremely pleased. Verta goes over to Sheriff Li. She condemns him for not using his supposed kung fu skills on Boss Zhao, but he responds by saying debts must be repaid, including good deeds. He thanks Blanca for paying up their debt and immediately gives his consent. He goes back home drunk and fulfilled. Dr. Xu and Blanca get married. They perform their marital rites by binding apart their hair, as a form of everlasting love. Blanca goes on to bury the bound hair with her hairpin. There she sees a flashback of when she was rescued by the mysterious man. He meets her sister Verta, who is surprised to see her so early. Blanca tells her that she has vowed to be a devoted wife and forget about their magic arts. She asks that they forget about the spirit world and live peacefully with humans even if it was for one lifetime. Verta doesn't agree with her, as the magic arts were difficult to master and she wouldn't just give them up so easily. She tries to make her sister see that with a little bit of magic, she would be able to get anything she wants, including a nice house and lots of jewelry. Blanca disagrees, saying with magic comes a lot of trouble. Verda is surprised that Blanca is willing to throw away her immortality for Xu Xuan, who she believes is the reincarnation of the man that saved her. Blanca lives with her husband as a mortal, and their house was built on love as they did things together. One time after they had returned from the Cold Water Festival, Dr. Xu is surprised to find a lot of people at his house. A woman had gotten an illness and then fainted. Dr. Xu examines the woman, as he is able to bring back her consciousness. People asked for the symptoms so as not to catch the disease. Dr. Xu tells his wife that the epidemic has been sudden, and no clinic was willing to help because a cure hasn't been found. The remedy he used to make people better contains a lot of expensive herbs as ordinary people couldn't afford it. The pharmacists in town just care about their profit, they don't care if people lived or die. Blanca is concerned and asks that they open a pharmacy, but then the capital is too much. Dr. Xu chips in that Sheriff Li can't even trace the origin of this strange plague. In the next scene, Blanca travels with her sister as they try to figure out the origin of the issue. Verda lets her know that the plague traveled in a straight line from the west to the east, and it doesn't seem natural. She suspects that someone in the city is poisoning people on purpose. They go on to check the wells and discover that it had a foul odor, which means they had just been poisoned. They proceed to move to the other well. There they meet an old Taoist who sells pills that seem to cure people from the disease. Blanca suspects the Taoist as she walks past him. They go to the other well and notice it has just been poisoned also. Verda immediately suspects that it must have been the traveling Taoist. The next morning, a lot of people gathered at the Taoist shop seeking medicine that would help cure them. Blanca is furious that the Taoist poisoned the waters and now sells the antidote to people. She tries to use her powers to stop him, but then Verda stops her, reminding her of her promise not to use powers not even in an emergency. Verda assures her that his will take care of the Taoist. Blanca distracts the Taoist, warning him to stop his illegal business as Verda takes his herbs and then some money. Blanca brings the herbs and money to Dr. Xu. He finds the herb unusual. Thanking Blanca for her help, he lets her know that they still need 100 taels of silver to open a pharmacy. Verda, who is listening in on their conversations, then decides to go rob the magistrate, as they have lots of silvers. She transforms into a green snake, as she infiltrates the magistrate's office, stealing lots of valuables. The next day, Dr. Xu opens up his pharmacy. Although Blanca doesn't like the trouble Verda has just caused, she pleads that it should be the last time. But Verda doesn't promise anything. They decide to name the pharmacy, the Hall of Protection. After hearing the name, Xu Shen has a little déjà vu. He suddenly remembers where he can find the herbs that will cure the people. The herbs could be found on a steep slope. Blanca goes on with him, as it was a dangerous climb. Unfortunately, while picking up the herbs, Xu Shen falls. With no other option, Blanca uses her magic to save him, and they begin to fly. Xu Shen is surprised that they are able to fly, but Blanca quickly convinces him that the mountain gods have saved him because of his good heart. A grateful Xu Shen then vows to use the mountain herbs to save lives, while Blanca watches in admiration. Sheriff Li is asked by the magistrate to solve the silver heist, but the case is a difficult one because he has no clue as to how the thief broke into the office. Just then a monk called Fahian is being sent to assist Sheriff Li in cracking the case. Sheriff Li explains the case to him, saying there have been no signs of previous break-ins. The monk uses his beads to summon his spirit animal, Goldie. Goldie begins to sniff the place for clues. In order not to be left out, Sheriff Li joins in the search. Goldie finds a bag of herb with an inscription, Master of Midnight. The monk figures out that it is the rat demon and this isn't a human crime. He then asks the sheriff to search the town for a Taoist with the name Master of Midnight. Sheriff Li visits Dr. Xu's pharmacy. He is happy to see that it had become an instant success. He had come there with other officers to see if the Master of Midnight would show up. The Taoist, on the other hand, promises to get back at the sisters for exposing him and even planting evidence on a crime scene. Sheriff Li goes on to congratulate Dr. Xu on his booming business. With no means to identify the thief, he decides to write a letter to Hangzhou's top opera troupe. Days later a reply comes in. Sheriff Li shares this good news to Xu, Blanca, and Verda, saying he had organized an opera with Hangzhou's top troupe Precious Jade Workshop to celebrate the success of Hall of Protection. Blanca is taken aback by that name, and doesn't subscribe to the idea. On the day of the performance, Blanca doesn't seem to be enjoying herself as the others. Verda quickly notices and asks what the problem could be. Blanca then reveals that the actress playing Red Maid is a demon and she knows her from 500 years ago. After the ceremony, the Taoist, also known as the Rat Demon, meets up with Dr. Xu. He tells him that there is a dark aura in his house, and demon spirits lives with him. He hands over Dr. Xu, a talisman for protection. As Xu Shen gets home, Blanca is affected by the talisman. He rushes to go check on her, as Verda tries to get rid of the talisman. Blanca distracts her husband, while Verda uses magic to destroy the talisman. They are told that Xu Shen got the talisman from the Taoist. So, Verda goes on to attack him. Just as she chases after him, the monk and his spirit animal Goldie gets hold of the rat demon, while Verda quickly hides. He tries to destroy the Taoist as the rat demon pleads, saying he had been framed. The monk refuses to listen, saying demons aren't supposed to exist in this part of the world. The rat demon quickly rats out Verda. Verda, on the other hand, tries to defend herself, but the monk is just too strong for her. She manages to bite him before fleeing. The monk, seeing that so many evil spirits reside in Hangzhou, is determined to eradicate all of them. In the day of the Dragon Boat Festival, the monk had cast a spell on the regular wine, as it would affect only demons. While Verda and Blanca celebrates with Sheriff Li for winning the competition, he offers them the regular wine. Just as Blanca takes a drink, she starts feeling dizzy and then requests to go back home. On her way home, the spell becomes really terrible and she falls inside a pond. Dr. Xu goes back home to check on his sick wife, only to discover that no one was home. He hears a faint scream and is terrified. He goes on to the river where his name is being called. Suddenly, Blanca appears as a giant white snake from beneath the river. Out of fear, Dr. Xu falls to the ground as he faints. A worried Blanca transforms back to her human self as she seeks to revive her husband. She takes him to the Red Maid. The Red Maid lets Blanca know that demons and humans aren't meant to pair. However, the only way to save her husband is by going to Mountain Kunlun, a very dangerous place where she will have to find a fairy grass. The Red Maid brings out an incense burner, saying Blanca must bring the fairy grass before the incense burns out, or else the road to come back home will be cut out. She hands Blanca a sword as she casts a spell that will take her to the mountain. Blanca proceeds on her journey to Mountain Kunlun. There she finds the fairy grass, but as soon as she takes it, the grass attacks her. Luckily, she is able to stop the attack. Just as she proceeds to leave, the Kunlun brothers, who are the guardian fairies of Mountain Kunlun, tries to stop her. They find her to be a demon who had desecrated their mountain. They attack Blanca, but she is able to escape with the help of the Red Maid. The Red Maid uses the fairy grass to heal Dr. Xu, but he is expected to wake up a few days later, as he is undergoing recovery. Xu Shen finally wakes up. He tells Blanca everything he had seen, but Blanca waves it off as a dream. He goes on to tell her about the giant snake, saying he is so sure about the snake. The next few days, Xu Shen refuses to come out in fear of the snake, so Blanca and Verda comes up with a plan to get rid of his fears. Blanca requests that Xu Shen takes her to where he claims to have seen the snake, so he brings her to the pond. There, Verda uses her magic to summon a snake. She uses it to tease Xu Shen and Sheriff Li as they all ran away for their lives. Just as the snake is about to eat up Xu Shen, Verda uses her sword to cut it into half. With the snake killed, Xu Shen's fears were all gone. The next morning, Sheriff Li talks about Verda's bravery, as he offers to find a perfect man for her. He had so many suitors lined up for her, but no one could match up with Verda. Just then the monk comes in. He learns about the giant snake that was killed and offered to go see Verda. He is dressed in nice robes that Verda couldn't even recognize him as the monk, not until she sees the bite on his hand. She quickly escapes before he could make any move. This confirms her identity as the demon snake. The monk learns that her sister also felt dizzy after taking the regular wine, so he goes on to warn Dr. Xu that demons were living with him. Xu Shen informs his wife about this, claiming the monk had asked to see her. She goes on to meet the monk. He discovers that Blanca is also a demon and then uses his powers to subdue her, making her so weak. She transforms to a giant snake, revealing her demon identity to her husband. Seeing that the monk could destroy his wife, Xu Shen decides to save her by distracting the priest and stealing his golden bowl. An injured Blanca is able to escape. With their secrets exposed, Verda goes on to look for her sister. Meanwhile, Xu Shen remembers the precious jade workshop, and then goes to her for help. She offers to help him, but warns that he might die in the process, as the only way to save Blanca is by attacking the monk's beast. He is given a flute to play with all his vitals, as this is the only way to lure the beast back into the bowl. He is to play loud enough to stop the attack, although he might not survive it, but he'd be able to save his wife. A determined Xu Shen begins to play the flute with all his might. On the other hand, Verda is able to find her injured sister. Xu Shen finishes luring the beast inside the golden bowl, as he proceeds to go look for his wife. He is advised by a villager to flee town as the people are coming after him for harboring demons. Xu Shen takes the golden bowl to the Jishan temple where he meets the monk Fahane. He tries to plead on behalf of his wife, but the monk perceives them to be evil, and believes demons should not exist. They capture Xu Shen, in hope that they will annihilate the demons when they come to rescue him. Verda and Blanca returns back to the village in search of Xu Shen. Sheriff Li, who tries to help his sister-in-law, tells them to leave as the people were after them. He still regards them as family and wouldn't betray them. Sheriff Li lets them know that Xu Shen had gone to the Jishan temple. Verda perceives this as trap, and asks that they forget about Xu Shen, because he sold Blanca out to the monk. Sheriff Li defends his brother-in-law, saying, Xu Shen loves Blanca. They can't defeat the monk, because he is very powerful than them. Because of this, Blanca goes on to dig out her hair ribbon. She remembers the vow she made and how she promised not to use magic again. Blanca sobs softly and then discovers that she is pregnant. Verda and Sheriff Li goes on to rescue Xu Shen from his prison cell. Verda, who is very angry at Xu Shen, attacks him. She confronts him for selling out Blanca despite the love she has for him. Xu Shen lets her know that he will never harm his beloved wife. He also gets to find out that Blanca is pregnant, as they all proceed to go meet her. Unfortunately, Monk Fahane sees them and goes after them with his beast. Xu Shen reunites with his wife, Blanca. He promises that the child is going to come into this world peacefully. Just then, Monk Fahane shows up with his beast. He condemns the irregularity of humans and demons existing together, saying it violates the rules of heaven and earth. Verda also condemns him for being heartless, saying her sister has never hurt anyone. The monk lets Xu Shen know that he's been bewitched by Blanca's human form, and then reminds him of how he almost died after seeing her as a giant snake. Blanca decides to transform to her original form. After seeing how scared Xu Shen was, she decides to leave. Xu Shen runs after her, reminding her of their vows to stay together forever. He gives an emotional speech that melts everyone except the monk. He is able to touch his beloved wife in her giant snake form. Monk Fahane isn't having any of this, and proceeds to attack the duo. During a fierce battle, he is able to defeat Blanca, subduing her demon powers with his golden bowl. Just then, Xu Shen heroically begins to play the flute. The power from the flute is able to take down the beast, but then at the expense of his Xu Shen life. After he had successfully defeated the monk, he falls to the ground, as a tearful Blanca rushes over to meet him. Monk Fahane, who isn't ready to accept defeat, then unleashes his ultimate power, but then the baby in Blanca's belly is able to shield them from the attack. The monk realizes that Blanca is pregnant, after seeing the star of mortal incarnation. Verda quickly saves Blanca as they escape. The monk lets Sheriff Li know that Xu Shen could be saved, although he had used up all his vital essence in saving Blanca. Sheriff Li takes his brother-in-law back to the temple. Meanwhile, Verda and Blanca raise the newborn child. Blanca proceeds to visit the temple with her child during the Lantern Festival. Verda, who notices that Blanca had left, hurriedly rushes to meet her on the broken bridge. She promises to be by her side forever, and invade the Jishan temple whenever she is ready. The end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe.